Hello. So this week I have put together a portfolio website for my dad, who is an artist and deserved to have a nice portfolio website, but couldn't sort that out, so I made one instead. This is the first portfolio website I've ever tried to put together, so I thought it would be a really interesting process to first of all do and then to make a video kind of talking about. But to begin, I would like to share with you a 60-second explanation of how the internet works and how websites actually work in terms of what we see from our browser. And I had a few little friends to help me, and this is dedicated to my wonderful niece, who is great. Okay, what we first of all have to know is that a website is just a set of files held on a computer called a server. When our computer searches for a website like malcolmjackson.art, what's actually going on is that the computer sends a message to the server asking to get a copy of those files, and the server then sends back those files, and that's what we see when we see a website. However, we don't necessarily know where the server is, so we need a third computer, which is called a DNS server, and so that is an address book for the internet and tells us where all the websites are in the world. So what happens when we look for a website is our computer first of all asks the DNS server where we can find it, the DNS server tells us, and then we follow those instructions to get to the server, which is where we've sent our message going, please can we see this website, and it goes yes of course and sends us back those files. So this whole video is going to be a high-level explanation, so it's going to be very basic. It's not talking about the low-level exact processes. This is also not an expert tutorial, because I'm not an expert. This is just based on my own experiences. I in no way pretend that it's anything more than that. So, but if you're interested, then I'd like to talk you through what went into making this site. So to begin with, I'm just going to talk you through the programs and the actual websites which I needed to use to make this site. And then just give you a rough overview of the entire process. It was really interesting for me to put together as a first project, and I think it's very worth checking out. So to begin with, the programs and the websites, I'd like to split them into two categories of creation and of deployment. So creation is just like the programs used to make the site, to code it, the images used, etc. And then deployment is actually getting it onto the internet. So as per the previous explanation, actually putting those files onto the server, registering it with a DNS server, etc., etc. Okay, so in terms of those programs or websites that I used for making it, so the creation side of things, the vast majority of the code is based on a Brad Traversy of Traversy Media YouTube video called Creative Agency Website from Scratch, HTML and CSS. I will put a link in the description. It's a very good video, and Traversy does a fantastic job of explaining things perfectly for the level that I'm currently at, and I would strongly recommend his videos for anyone. I think they cover all ability ranges, but this specific one was good for beginners to intermediates, which is kind of where I place myself at present. The code editor I used for actually writing the code was VS Code. It's free, it's great. Check it out. Because this website was going to be a static website, which essentially just means that it is just a few files. It doesn't do anything clever with a server. It's a little bit confusing, but just bear with me that it's just a very, very basic website. Making a contact form which actually sends emails was remarkably difficult, but luckily there was a service called formsubmit.co, which I've been using for this particular site, and that works perfectly for right now and is again free. So that's really, really useful. The one thing I did actually spend money on was the lightbox effect. So that's actually what displays the portfolio images, because I purchased the premium version of FS Lightbox. While lightboxes aren't the hardest things to make, and you just need an amount of JavaScript knowledge, because this was my first portfolio site and because it's predominantly art-based and visual, I really wanted to do the best job I possibly could do with the portfolio side of things. So instead of trying to cobble together my own lightbox for an actual client, I just purchased it, and that also means I've got that for future, which is useful. I think you can gather resources to use on different projects as you go along. But in future, I could well make my own. I don't think it's that difficult from what I've heard, but again, not an authority, so don't know conclusively. And then all the actual assets were provided by the client, in this case, my dad. So he, first of all, approved the fact that I was going to use the Traversy Media creative agency website from scratch tutorial and, you know, that format and layout. He was very happy because that meant that there was a demo that I could send to him as the client of that fully working website. And I just said, we're going to be emulating this. And that meant that he had something, you know, that he could explore and play around with, which was great. You know, and so he then provided, the client, I should say, in this case, my dad, the client provided all the text, all of the images. I would then request if the images were too large, which they were to begin with, that they be made smaller, both in dimensions and also in file size. And then if they could be compressed based upon how the lightbox I was using works, I also needed separate thumbnail images, which incidentally all had to be square. So again, I asked the client to provide all of those so that they would be exactly the squares that he wanted. Which worked really, really well and was very useful for the client to learn how to do these things as well. And yeah, and that was kind of that. So those are the vast majority of the things used in the creation of the site. For the deployment, so all of the code itself, in terms of version control and, you know, in terms of actually like just maintaining it and making sure that we can keep a log on what's changed, etc., was hosted through GitHub. That is again free. The server, so the actual place which holds the files, which will hold the website's files, was held through netlify.com, and that was for free. And the domain name was purchased through a service called namecheap.com. So that's namecheap.com allow you to purchase domain names which will then be registered by the DNS server as per the earlier explanation. So you need to purchase, in our case, malcolmjackson.art, or for me personally, jacksaw.xyz. Namecheap are, as per their name, very cheap. You know, it was about what, like £7, £5 a year or something like that. It was really quite minimal. But if you didn't want to spend any money at all, both Netlify and GitHub both provide free services to host your pages. So for example, Netlify, I believe, would mean that your website can be accessed through like malcolmjackson.netlify.com, and GitHub, I would think, is like, you know, github.pages, something like that. Anyway, so there are free ways you can do that, but we decided to purchase the domain name because, you know, it's fun, and Namecheap have some really nice, you know, domains like .art, .xyz, you know, those are just quite nice. Yeah, and that's essentially it. You know, we had the design, we agreed on the design. I went away and coded it. I then asked for the assets to be sent over. They were, you know, there was iteration, there were things which were changed, formats, layouts, etc. But, you know, that's fairly standard. And then we deployed it, and it is now live and is on the internet. And now he has a portfolio website, and I have my first kind of release. So yeah, I thought it was really, really good fun, and I very, very much enjoyed it. And I think now, for me personally, I would just like to improve, you know, my abilities to make these kind of sites, because, you know, this is a very, very basic one. It's what's referred to as a static one, so it doesn't have a framework, or it doesn't have any server-side processes, which is slightly out of scope for this video. I mean, talking about scope, I mean, one of the important things in talking about client and developer relations was just about when to be able to tell your client that their requests are out of scope. And that's a very, very important thing to set up, and, you know, scope and creep and making sure that what you're actually doing is related to the project you're hired for is very, very important. Or, you know, they might turn around and go like, you know, this one thing doesn't work in the particular way, and you just have to turn around to the client and go like, that is out of scope for this current project. And luckily I had a good relationship with my client in this instance. But yeah, that's something that can definitely catch people out in future, well, of any project ever. Anyway, so just wanted to do a quick video just explaining that. Please do check out the site, malcolmjackson.art. His artwork is wonderful. Do let me know what you think of the site as a whole. I really like it, and I had a great time working on it. So let me know what you think, and I will see you soon. Take care. Bye.